everybody. Glad to see you here today. This is the College of Education and Research Colloquium. We're happy that you could make it today. Our format is that we have two speakers today, which is our usual format for faculty, and each speaker is going to take about a half an hour to talk about work that they're doing. We have Professor Yanping Jin and Professor Scott Schaffer. After each of their presentations, we'll have about another half an hour where we can have questions, informal conversation if you want to hang around and chat with them. So we're pleased to have you all here.
Okay, I dare say this is something completely different than what we just heard. We're going to have a completely different context, but bear with me, and we are going to talk about problem solving, and we're going to talk about problem solving in the undergraduate education context, and we're going to talk about it in the black box of learning, which is known as socio-cultural learning in teams. So very different operationally. Just relax, see how this goes for you. Nothing about math and nothing about algebra here. Okay, I'm Scott Schaffer. I'm an associate professor in what we're now calling the Learning, Design, and Technology program. That used to be called Educational Technology, and that's in the Curriculum and Instruction department. One of the things that, does anybody know what this is?
Spicy fish.
It's fish soup. If you've ever made soup, you know that you can follow a recipe and put all the ingredients in there, but if you take 10 chefs or 10 cooks, they follow the same recipe, somehow or another it tastes different, right? These things meld together when you put things together. Same thing with music. Lots of people can play notes, but music lovers know that it's what between the notes that makes music sound really interesting, right? Same thing here as just as a metaphor with teams. When you put teams together, and many of you have worked on project teams, some work really well and some don't. And so that's really what we've been interested in studying. And in particular, within the engineering education and other design fields, there's been a lot of emphasis on changing at the institutional level from the silo approach to teaching things like mechanical engineering or teaching graphic design, and trying to put these programs together. In typically an engineering program, you might have a capstone project right at the end of your senior year. What we're trying to do here, and what Purdue's been trying to do in many other institutions, is try to get out of the silo mentality of you will get your degree in this particular program area and you will not work with anybody else within any other programs. So that's what they're trying to break, is that silo, especially in engineering, but I think also across the design fields. So that's what one of the areas of interest here. I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm also going to introduce one of my graduate students, Xiaojun Chen, who is here with us. One of the things that I was shocked to realize is that I'm now in my 6th year of working in this area, and it's almost that's a commitment almost as much as my marriage. So it's kind of scaring me. It's looking like a career. But one of the things that I got started with this virtual global teamwork and working with students in England, worked with students in China, with my graduate students working with international students virtually. We started there. We started looking at those kinds of things, and then got into what we're calling cross-disciplinary learning, or learning in multidisciplinary perspective, students coming from different disciplinary backgrounds in project teams. So we've been looking at that. One of my students did a dissertation around that and created a model for cross-disciplinary learning. We're now really looking at the ill-structured problem solving and the problem solving within complex teams and teams that are multidisciplinary. I'm going to use a couple different terms. Multidisciplinary just means the composition of the team, that the team is comprised of students or learners from different disciplinary areas. Cross-disciplinary learning would suggest something that hopefully happens when they are in these multidisciplinary settings, that they actually engage in and share and learn in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise learned. That's the whole idea of putting the multidisciplinary team together, right? Is that multiple perspectives, are there, and students can learn from one another. Xiaojun is working closely on this project with me, as have others. Another one, Lisette Reyes, another doctoral student in our program. And oops, wrong computer. There we go. I guess I'm always obliged to put this little note up there. The study is a National Science Foundation project, just in year 2. And I'm working here locally with Shanae Zhu in the Department of Communications, and her specialty is organizational behavior. And Bill Oakes, who is a professor and director of something called EPICS. I don't know if you've ever heard of EPICS, Engineering Projects in Community Service. And then Xiaojun. And we'll talk a little bit more about EPICS, because that is the context in which we're working here. This is a 3-year, what they called CCLI, which is now called a TWOS grant. And it's a collaborative grant, and we're working with other universities, Illinois Institute of Technology, Lehigh, Michigan Tech, Technological University, and Purdue. The thing that brings these 4 together, or the reason that it's a collaborative, is that all are interested in design. And so the idea of the commercialization process, design thinking, teamwork and leadership, and professional ethical behavior. So you're putting together these teams, working on complex problems, and these are some of the big goals that each of these universities has programs like EPICS that with these overall overarching goals. So we have been working, each of the universities has been working really on with a common or a core framework, which I'll share with you, and collecting data around that framework. Our driving question is really related to assessment. So how can assessment of team learning be integrated with project experiences to provide benefit to individuals, teams, projects, programs, and clients? In learning, design, and technology, we're really interested in how can we influence and hopefully improve the learning environment. So essentially, if you think of an EPICS program or teams within EPICS, we're really interested in how can we support the cross-disciplinary learning of the team learning process. And essentially that also, by extension, we're interested in how cross-disciplinary teams work in industry. In industry, they don't use the term cross-disciplinary. They would say cross-functional, functional teams, sales, engineering, production, that kind of thing. In assessment, classically, there's 2 ways to do it. You've got a high-fidelity assessment. That's the narrow and deep assessment. Versus a kind of looking at bandwidth assessment, looking at a lot of different learners and at a fairly high level. I think with the first presentation, I would consider that more of a high fidelity sort of assessment. What we're doing is a mixed method, so we'll do a little bit of both. Some of each. We're trying to shoot for the middle. One of the things here, as you could probably realize, this is hard to operationalize. The students on teams work and learn within complex ecologies, influencing their processes and outcomes. It's very difficult to figure out why people are doing what they're doing in teams, right? And why some teams are more effective than others. There's just so many variables that you can't control or explain, or really even manipulate. So when you're talking about this kind of research, it's naturalistic settings. You're looking at, a lot of times, repeated measures, looking at individuals over the course of a semester, not trying to manipulate any variables here. We're just trying to see what's happening, for the most part. Observe and measure as it happens. One of the people that have influenced me is a complexity systems researcher, Marcelo Sada. He suggested there's reasons that, think about why teams fail. Is it endless advocacy, self-absorption? Is it an excess of negativity? Any of you have worked on teams, some of these may sound familiar to you. Destructive criticism that imprisons them in restrictive emotional spaces, or is their inability to create highly interconnected patterns of interaction. As a complexity researcher, he was really interested in that last one, and he measured interaction patterns across lots and lots and lots of different teams, especially within industry. Some of the things that he was looking for and what he termed meta-learning was the ability of a team to, and this is similar to metacognition, in the sense that you learn about how to manage your own processes. You're not waiting for somebody else to manage it, or for a coordinator or a leader to say, hey, you need to get moving faster. It's more of becoming aware of your own teams and your team level interactions, and which ones are positive, which ones are negative, trying to reduce those ones that are negative, trying to increase those ones that are positive. This is classic change research. Again, now, I know for you math people, this is all new stuff, but in change research, this is essentially what you're trying to do, is reduce the negatives, increase the positives, and at some point, there's a critical mass, so to speak, of positives that will, in which you can predict change. That's kind of what we're looking at here, is trying to understand when do these teams go over the edge of innovation and creativity versus just work to get the project done, which is one of the challenges for these programs. Two strands of team research. You can explain a lot of the variance in team performance with structural and context differences. The composition of the team, the task, complexity, and the reward structure will explain a lot. If you can figure those out, and many business industries have figured it out, this is a way to predict team performance. We're interested in that, but we're also interested in more in the other side, the learning side, the interpersonal aspects of teams and how team members interact, as well as in the cognitive aspect of it, in terms of what are some of the kinds of feedback systems and mechanisms that tend to help teams reduce those negatives, increase the positives. We talk about project learning here. As you know, projects are just vastly complex and different. Some have technical components, especially in the engineering area. You're going to get people who are aeronautical engineers in the same group with someone who might come from computer graphics, or from some other, or from psychology, or a field that's not that technical in the same way. You're going to get structured versus ill-structured problems. And we're really interested in design. And so if you're studying folks who are in the conceptual design phase versus those who are in a production phase, you have a really completely different sort of feeling about what those teams are doing, and the kinds of tasks they engage in are completely different. Context also quite important, as we said, from a project point of view. So as we're doing this research, we're trying to identify all these things at the same time as they're going on in teams, and trying to do our best to measure them as accurately as possible. This has been around for a while. This is Ralph Stacey's research related to complexity, but it kind of building on that idea of problem and project complexity. Down here in the red zone there, what you're looking at are teams or projects where there's a relatively straightforward solution. You're not going to have on the technical and social axes there too much disagreement. There's an agreed way to do it. The teams that work on problems in that red zone, they're going to have a different experience, if you will, than teams that are working the further you go out here into more negotiated solutions, solutions that aren't well defined. The team has to actually define those solutions. The further you get out, the more complex, according to Stacey, moving all the way out to anarchy. That might explain Egypt and Libya right now these days. So okay, you've got that level of complexity and social technical. Relationship between context and team performance. One of the things that we're trying to do here is model in learning design. These are the three major things that we look at when we design any learning space. What is the context in which that learning is going to happen? What is the nature of the task? We do task analysis. What are the characteristics of learners? These are complicated things, and in a team, then you just double it up. exponentially complicates measurement of these factors. So we're looking at lots of things. In the context, we're looking at how diverse are the teams, what is the experience level of the team members. Are they seniors? Are they freshmen? Do they have experience on ethics teams? Is this their first team? We start to look at a lot of those factors, looking at GPA, and so on. And the nature of the tasks, we're looking at design stage, or the phase of design in which they are in. And then we're looking at some individual characteristics such as gender, their confidence level or self-efficacy levels, and so on. So those are the three major things we're looking at. And then we're also attempting here to look then at some of the performance measures that ethics has. And so you can see some of these here. There's the self-reported performance, and then we've got external evaluations by the client, or they'll have external critiques by members of the engineering community who will come in and give critical evaluations in their final design projects. And that's at the team level. Then on the individual level, they do peer reviews or peer evaluations, and then we're looking at self-efficacy, and then individual satisfaction. I'm going to circle the self-efficacy and change in self-efficacy, because then I'm going to go from this very broad stuff that we're talking about now to try to zoom in a little bit on self-efficacy and what we've been trying to understand more about self-efficacy in this environment. Again, very broadly, we're connecting those three major things: context, task, individual differences, or individual characteristics, then with learning behaviors that are influenced by the confidence of the learner to work in working with others, and that influences something called team potency or team efficacy or confidence, that they can complete and actually perform well, and then their actual team effectiveness. What we mean by team learning here are learning behaviors that consist of individuals and teams accessing data to aid in decision making. The kinds of things we're talking about here are individuals that are able to identify strengths, their own strengths. In order to be a good team member, you have to know what you bring to the party, right? You have to know what you can and can't do, understand the goals, the scope of the project. Now, how can I contribute? That's number one. If you can't do that, it's really difficult to share and be an active team member. It seems like a no-brainer. It's not. That's where a lot of people get stuck, is trying to figure out, they either feel like they're on the wrong team because they can't contribute because they don't have the technical expertise, perhaps. Imagine you're a math education person on a team that is creating figuring out the way to design crosswalks at the middle school. How are you going to contribute to this team? You may bring something, but it may not be in math education. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some way to apply it, but on the surface, you have to figure out what that is. Other team behaviors or learning behaviors that we look for are asking for help, seeking feedback. People don't ask for help very often. That's a sign of weakness, isn't it? That's a sign that you don't know, and when you ask for help or seek feedback from your teammates especially, that's risky. Discussing problems, teams that are able to discuss problems they're having, both related to the design. So we'll study the way that they discuss problems. Do they share critical information? Often there's one or two members of the team who kind of are the keepers of the information, and they're people who are key to the success of the team. Either they feel like sharing it and will share, or they'll withhold it, and for personal reasons. Some of those reasons that Losada maybe we mentioned earlier. And then teams that practice hypothesis testing, or thinking through the problem and hypothesis related to solution generation tend to be more successful. So those are some of the behaviors that we're looking for, and we're looking for those in, we've designed questionnaires to look at those, but we also look at their reflections and some of their, from a qualitative point of view, some of their written responses and also their actual design products for evidence of some of these things. Some of our questions here: do multidisciplinary teams in university settings exhibit these learning behaviors? How often? In what circumstances? What is their level of confidence related to performing these behaviors while working on projects? And does learning have anything to do with performance in this context? That's the big question, right? So if you're trying to support learners in their goal of creating a really interesting and innovative design, what do we need to do to promote the kind of interaction, the kind of learning behaviors that we feel lead to that design? So there's an assumption there, right? Some projects are really good because there's a star on the team, maybe. Other projects are really good when you have this synthesis of people who just really believe in what they're doing, understand the goal, and then are creative about trying to solve it. So those are the kinds of things you are trying to filter out here or look at. Really quickly, I got about 10 minutes. I'm going to just, and I know you probably are all familiar with these kinds of things as education folks, but obviously this is in the experiential learning realm. It's in the realm of what we might also call authentic learning. When in these constructivist learning environments, some of the classic goals for such an environment and the EPICS program and any of the other programs, the three other universities would say that these, yes, are the way that this is what we've set out to do from a design goals perspective in terms of our learning environment. There's not much didactic learning happening. There's not much lecturing happening, right? Especially in EPIC's case, they just start. They have to figure it out. That's part of the project. There's not a whole lot of hand-holding, if you will. Meet the client, understand what the client's problem is, ask questions, figure it out. You have a design process. Now there is a model they share, but it's really not scaffolded much. Pretty much left to their own devices. This is something we've seen and where we think we can help. Perhaps some scaffolding will help some of these teams. What to assess? And there's been a lot of research around this. Merrill, Gagné, and Bloom's. We're looking at really that synthesis level, the kind of understanding is what we're trying to assess here. How well do people learn from one another, and then how can they represent that learning? Jonathan suggested, that when you're assessing this kind of knowledge construction, you have to look at originality. Look at the creativity of their solutions. This is a huge challenge. Many of these teams work in one semester, maybe over 2 or 3 semesters, and with different team members entering and leaving. So it makes continuity challenging, and I think continuity is a part of an essential ingredient for this originality, I think, that Jonathan's getting at. This is very different, by the way, than if you looked at, say, a project that was 5 weeks long in a class setting, right? They said, okay, we're going to put 5 students together, and they're going to go and discuss and work on something, and then in 3 or 4 weeks come back with something, a solution. That's a bit more of a, I might put that in it's more of it's a problem to solve, but the complexity of those problems are much less, I think, than, or at least less complex than what we're dealing with here. I mentioned Kim-Pong Lee. He's working at JetBlue University right now, and that's not a real university. That's a university, a corporate university within the airline, JetBlue. And we developed this model as a kind of try to understand team learning, and it was developed by Renate Fruchter at Stanford. She works in the engineering area. I think it's construction engineering. And she was one who looked at the evolution of learning over the phase of the project, and looked at the idea of moving from individual awareness of my own strengths to move to an understanding and appreciation of the disciplines of my teammates, and that had to happen for creativity and originality to happen on projects. We've been spinning off of her work, and what we looked at here, this might be small, but what we looked at here was then if we're going to design help for cross-disciplinary learning, what objectives would we attempt to work from here? And so the cross-disciplinary team learning, there were 4 of them that we started with in our model. Identification, and I mentioned that. That's your individual or self understanding. And really what you have here when you look at these objectives, it's kind of a meta theory. And when we did our research in team learning, all start with individual learning, right? Then you recognize others' strengths and weaknesses. You don't diss them. You try to understand where they're coming from. You recognize their strengths and weaknesses relative to your own. This is all, doesn't matter what kind of learning environment it is. When you have groups or teams, these are common collaborative learning processes. Then when you start to get to 3 and 4, appreciation and integration, some of these things, these behaviors now, or the way that we've defined this, is really more unique to the multidisciplinary setting. And that is demonstrating the conceptual understanding of other disciplines. So you'll start to hear students talking in other disciplines' terms. They'll start to ask questions that suggest they're understanding the other discipline better, or they're asking questions to draw out or get a better understanding of it. These are the kinds of things that a program like EPICS wants. That's what they want to happen, is that you get this rich engagement with one another that helps to draw out and share across disciplines. So these are the 4 we started with from a model. We developed items related to these, and we also use these, essentially these 4 areas as our way to code and analyze reflection data and so on. We looked at, we started last spring and fall, and we're continuing this spring. We have pre and post data on self-efficacy change. And self-efficacy theory is really comes from Bandura's. I don't know how far, I don't think I'm going to go into this too far today, but the idea is that self-efficacy is really a level of confidence that you would have, and in this case, the level of confidence that these learners would have that they can engage with these team members from other disciplines in a high level way. And so we looked at self-efficacy levels across these teams pre and post. Typically with self-efficacy studies, you do a pre-assessment, then they will engage in their activities, and then you do a post. One of the problems for us in this naturalistic settings, you really have to do repeated measures to really get a picture, because when you do the pre-self-efficacy measure, there's a lot of stuff that happens, right? By the time you do the post, that you have no idea of all these things that have happened. So it's really, in some ways, it's a real challenge, and it really isn't appropriate to do it only quantitatively. You really need to have qualitative data to understand it. That's why we only did modeling here of this data. We're doing interviews. Xiaojun has done many interviews and an attempt to understand the cross-disciplinary team learning behaviors, and that's the direction we're going here. And there we go. We're calling this sequential explanatory design and a mixed method. And we have several instruments here, including interview guides, and we're looking at several types of data. Lots of students, 600 across 110 teams, 220 paired responses. We have enough power from a quantitative point of view to make some statements, and some of the statements that we will make are that our 4-factor model is not in fact a 4-factor model, it is a 3-factor model. And so what that suggests is that some of the, we found 3, identification and integration, the first and last in our study held up well. The 2 in the middle, the discussion and then the recognition of others, were muddled, shall we say. or they're very similar. There's a lot of overlap in those. But this confirms a lot of other team research. I think this is similar, that you'll have a lot of work has been done with identification of self within others, and then looking at the discussion, the recognition and appreciation of other disciplines. The part where it really breaks off is right here. Many teams just don't get to the integration level, we're finding. Let's real quickly, the summary here, we had a reliable 3-factor CDTL efficacy scale. One of the things we want to do is create a scale. And so I think we've accomplished that. We're still collecting data to confirm that. We should have plenty of N there. An overall statistically significant improvement in self-reported individual self-efficacy was found when you look across the board, and that was just in one semester, and we're still analyzing last fall's. However, here's the big but: substantial variation across the individuals. So you've got, look at this little stat here, which is kind of an interesting one. 66% of the participants reported increased efficacy. In other words, they got more confident from beginning to end in their confidence related to working with others on teams. And then 34%, almost a third, reported either no change or decreases. And there's a fair number of decreases. And we became interested in why would people go down in confidence? Think about it. Makes sense, doesn't it, to some degree? A lot of head shaking, yes. Some of the, and we'll talk about some of those really quickly in my, well, I have no time left. The more senior students reported greater improvement, but those with more experience on the teams reported less or lower levels of improvement. Kind of hard to explain that one. Task characteristics: students working on design tasks involving more design stages reported lower levels of improvement. That might be one. The harder the task was, the more design tasks they engaged in within a particular semester, the more they felt like they were really stretching themselves. So those students felt were actually prone to have lower levels of confidence in doing this. It stands to reason, the more design tasks you engage in, the more you're going to have to relate to one another in more complex ways. It went down. It's not what we expected, however. So we're left explaining that. And then you can see some of the others, and I'm gonna quit here because I'm going over. Some of the themes really quick, that the students reported they felt intimidated when they started, especially if they weren't in engineering, or if they were younger, freshman or sophomore on a team with seniors. They didn't know what to do because it seems like a big project to handle. They go and they really have no help. So it's overwhelming to a lot of people. So they start with low self-efficacy and then move up from there. Some of them just didn't share much, and some the last one there, realizing lack of knowledge and skills, was another important factor. They didn't know what they didn't know. It was kind of the way that they described it. They didn't know how complicated it was until they got into it, right? In other words, they reported a high level of confidence before they actually knew what it was they were what they were doing. As they progressed and started getting into the tasks, then their confidence kept going down more and more because I think they were questioning their ability to contribute. So it makes some sense there. And I'll quit there. Thank you for your attention.
Question?
Well, that really directly applies to what we do. I mean, or the team engaged in multidisciplinary. I don't have a lot of knowledge about your study, but I want to ask you, how do you evaluate individuals' contribution? I mean, make sure that everybody's contributing. So how do you assess? I mean, assessment, you talk about assessment. How do you assess each individual's contribution to the team? Basically, that relates to another question: how to make sure each individual are contributing. Because you will see sometime in the collaborative environment someone who is dominating the whole thing. And
the common term is the slacker. right?
So what's the force like? I don't understand what's like.
Well, we do it two different ways. Essentially, one is a self-report of how much time they spend on tasks, and it's related to what Ethics does here is peer evaluation. So in industry, they call it 360 evaluations. You rate yourself on a variety of tasks, and we in the peer evaluations, we have the cross-disciplinary learning objectives as part of that peer evaluation. So they rate themselves, and then others rate them, and part of that rating overall is, are they contributing in a meaningful way? Are they showing up to the meetings on time, and so on. So that's one way that we're getting at it.
And then related to how to promote this, how to facilitate the individual contribution, because you end up with some, people's confidence going down and down because they feel like they
Exactly.
out. And
Well, we think that's a great opportunity for us. And that statistic of it going down means we have an opportunity probably to help, because they really don't do anything right now. It just happens. Hopefully you have a team leader or advisors on that team who can catch it and will intervene or will try to help. But there's so many teams. As you can see, there's 60 or 70 each semester. So there's a lot, and it's hard to catch it. But that's what we're working on. Our next grant, I didn't have it up there, but we've submitted another grant, and that's really the focus, is formative assessment and trying to get a better picture of how they're doing throughout the semester, who's going up and who's going down, right? And then try to intervene.
I'm interested in how you promote create an environment that every individual will contribute.
Well, there's some things you can do.
Yeah.
What has worked for some of you in the audience? Can you think of things that have worked for you for teams? What kind of ways can we promote better teamwork?
I think just what you're doing, because I think they're often unaware that there are things that they can change, and when they begin to self-reflect and diagnose.
I think that's a big one, right?
Yeah.
That's a big one. Just having the data, just to show them, give them an opportunity to reflect more often. Right now, it tends to happen, and this is the way it is in a lot of courses that are based on semester. You assess maybe in the middle, and then you assess at the end. But that's one of the things, is trying to assess formatively more often, maybe every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. That follows a lot of what Bransford, and that group's research on formative assessment with children, is trying to help them understand through just reflecting, helping them see where they're at, and then they can reflect on that level.
I'm wondering about, have you ever had a chance to look for cultural diversity of participants? I mean, were they coming from the same cultural background, or how did it affect this cultural diversity
That's a really good question. And some of my research started there, and then we stopped because it was too complicated. And we haven't really gone into that too much. Now, Shajun has a little. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
We have looked at the gender, but because of the nature of the ethics program is engineering dominant, so most of the participants are male, white, Western. So little like about 2 or 3% are Asian and Indian, because of the nature of the design.
Or at least those are the types of students who are, because ethics is a voluntary program. So these are the people who are volunteering. They're not usually diverse from a cultural perspective, or gender for that matter. So that's a problem for them. And then engineering in general, they spend a lot of time on gender, recruiting females to engineering. But yeah, it's a great question, and it certainly has an impact. Just styles of learning, right? And what you grew up learning how to share, maybe some other person may think that's, why would I give up my secrets? That's my power. Right? My power is having this knowledge and this information. Why am I going to share it with this person who's not working as hard as me, or whatever you might believe, right? So that is a challenge, though.
How about disciplinary differences? Because you do have a chance to see where they come from.
Yeah, well, that's where we're really focusing, is the disciplinary differences, and, certainly that slide I had about the technical, and the more technical fields, there's not as bad of a problem, but when you have the technical and the social sciences, perhaps, engineering and social sciences disciplines together, there's a huge gulf there in coming together. Also depends on the project. Right, it depends on what the requirements of the project are. I actually am an advisor of ethics on a team of engineers, and they're working on an educational project. So they're out of their element to some degree, and it's interesting sort of to watch them squirm and wiggle their way around, trying to figure it out. But that's one of the challenges here. So it's not just about the discipline, it's about the task, right, as well, and what it is they have to do. Because ethics kind of goes across the spectrum of types of problems, from technical engineering problems to educational problems, creating websites, whatever it might be.
Is that self-report, are those items published and available for others to use in other situations? Yeah.
It should be pretty soon. We have a couple of things in the works. Yeah, we'd love to share that with you. Email me and we could maybe do some pre-publication stuff. Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay. How about what were the three, the CD, TL? That's the same thing. Is that where you found the 3 factors instead of 4?
Okay, yeah, that one is, one of our challenges here is we're worried, we want to have as large a event as possible, so we're still analyzing last fall's data to get that in the mix. That's what's slowing us down, to confirm the last spring semester's findings.
Okay.
So as soon as we have that, we're going to feel more confident about what I just talked about.
And then that will be published.
That will be published. Probably Journal of Engineering Education, where we're focusing on.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming today. If you want to hang around and bend the speaker's ears for another few minutes, we've got the room until 4 o'clock. But I appreciate you all coming. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's thank our speakers.